Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining the May 3rd meeting of the Citizen Oversight Board. Glad to have you here today. We will move a good amount of our board business to the back end of our meeting because we don't yet have a quorum, but are joined today by Denver Police Chief Ron Thomas. Thank you, Chief, for joining us. We sent the Chief some questions in advance, so we'll have him work through those. I just want to mention out loud that some of those questions regard the Auraria campus and issues of protest there. I personally work at a different university in the metro area, and so want to be careful to say out loud that if the conversation gets too conflicty, I may step off. But for now, the board has suggested that I stay on. So we'll stick with that. And thanks for your feedback on that approach. With that, Chief Thomas, I will turn it over to you. And if you could read the question we provided and answer it, that would be great. And if you have any opening remarks, I'm happy to have those as well.
No opening remarks. I mean, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. I think the most significant, advancement since the last time we met is that I have been officially confirmed by City Council as far as my mayoral appointment. And that actually leads to the first question, and that is, does being confirmed change anything about how you can or will lead the Denver Police Department? And, the answer to that is being confirmed does not alter at all how I will lead the Denver Police Department. I'm still committed to providing the best quality service to the citizens and residents of Denver. And I think it's important to say that the mayor and I have always been aligned on safety goals and what's best for the community. And so that certainly has not changed. The next question is, did the delay cause any impact or confusion? And I would say, no, not for me. I've understood all along that this was a process. And I think, everyone else on the police department recognized that it was a process, and I think we just all kind of put our heads down and did the work that we needed to do. And so I don't think that it provided any amount of confusion or had any significant impact. And then, so the next series of questions relates to the discipline matrix. I think maybe talked before about a desire to revise the discipline matrix. And so first question is, why do you think it should be changed, and what are you hoping to accomplish? And so the reason why I think that it should be changed is because, this was created to be a living, breathing document. So there are a number of changes that have occurred since the matrix was first developed. There have been legislative changes, there have been policy changes that I don't think that the matrix has adapted to. I think there are also some unintended consequences, I think, as it relates to discipline. And so just trying to tighten those things up. One thing that I think that is important to raise is, like, for instance, we used to shoot 4 times a year, and now we only shoot twice a year. And so should someone failing to shoot once or twice, and if you fail to shoot twice, you haven't qualified to shoot your gun in a year. And so should missing a qualification shoots have the same penalty as it did when we were shooting 4 times a year? The other thing is that failing to activate your body-worn camera starts off, the initial violation starts off, I think, at an oral reprimand. Well, we've been involved with body-worn cameras for almost 10 years, and I think that it's something that we've gotten a lot of muscle memory with. There's a large portion of our force that knows nothing else but body-worn cameras, and so is it appropriate to start a first violation at a oral reprimand? So, thinking about that. Also, when we go through a discipline case, there is sort of a progression where, there's the violation, and then because of the type of violation it is, I think they consider certain other violations within the same category during a certain time frame. And I think that the way that has the reason why that was put in place was to somehow build in progressive discipline. And I think that that what has happened is it gets applied in scenarios where it's really not a true progressive situation. For instance, if someone accidentally leaves their radio or their cell phone on the top of the car and they damage it, and that is categorized as a B violation, and then within the next year or so they have something else that's a very low level form of misconduct or mistake, but it's actually uniquely different than leaving your cell phone on the top of your car. The leaving your cell phone on the top of your car compounds your penalty for whatever other very minor mistake you made, and I just don't think that was the intended purpose. I think the intended purpose was to create a process for progressive discipline. I still want to have that, but I want to be careful about one mistake being conflated with another. And so those are the reasons why it's certainly not a desire to completely overhaul the disciplinary handbook. It's really just to kind of make it more contemporary, and I think do what I think we all are trying to do through discipline, which is improve behavior. And I think that leads to another component of wanting to make some changes to the discipline handbook. As I've shared, I know with you, Julia, that we really, and with the Office of the Independent Monitor as well, that we really want to move to training-based discipline, particularly when it comes to low-level misconduct. I think that creating a training module that helps them understand what they did wrong and how to do it right when it's a mistake of the head is a better outcome than giving somebody a written reprimand or a fine day for something that they may not even clearly understand what they did wrong. And so just wanting to rethink some of those things. And so that's my thought process, and that's what I'm hoping to accomplish. So sort of the next question is, when did you begin this reevaluation process? And when
maybe before you go on, Alfredo, do you have a question on
sorry.
previous topic?
Yeah. So thank you, first of all, Chief, for that response around bringing the disciplinary matrix to date. I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering about what that process looks like. Who needs to be involved?
Yeah.
What level of pushback, if any, do you anticipate?
So
can we get ahead of that? Just a little bit more about what that process looks like.
Well, that actually kind of falls into another question. So I don't know if you want to wait till I kind of get to that to maybe provide a
let's have you answer that, and then Alfredo, if that's unsatisfying to your question, let's follow up. I have sort of two questions on the changes to the matrix.
Yes.
I think there's two sort of separate things in this. One is, what does the matrix say, and is that appropriate to behaviors we want to incentivize and disincentivize? And then the other is, what is the process we have for applying that discipline matrix, and how effective is that in matching discipline to behavior? And sort of my perception is that the discipline matrix may have some realignment and updates that are necessary, but the process itself is where a lot of the misalignment happens. And I know particularly for community members who sort of read the matrix and say, you did this thing that's listed in the matrix, and it says, the discipline is 4 days, and the person got, 6 hours or something. And so for from my perception, that the issue is more in the process than the matrix itself.
Okay.
And so how much of the work here is going to be looking at the process for applying it?
Well, I mean, I think that the matrix informs the process, and so certainly as we refine the matrix, I think that we can talk about how and maybe even memorialize how that matrix informs the process and provide greater clarity to how the process works and how decisions are come to, and how the matrix actually supports the decisions that we come to.
Thanks.
Okay, so if I can find my place again, so we began the reevaluation process at the beginning of the year, and I really hope to be complete by the third quarter of 2024. And so, who is meaningfully involved? I think this is kind of the question that I was just recently asked. And so that is, myself, obviously, the Executive Director of Safety, both of the Internal Affairs Bureau and Conduct Review commanders, Division Chief of Administration, the Chief Compliance Officer in the Director's Office. Obviously, we will be keeping the independent monitor apprised as we and I'm sure there'll be a lot of dialogue along the way with probably your team, Julia, as well as the Office of the Independent Monitor. We don't really want to do this in a vacuum all by ourselves and then just spring it on you. We want to to come up with, or have sort of a collaborative process where we come to some final conclusions about what the discipline matrix looks like, and then ultimately who is going to make the final determination of what that looks like. I think appropriately it's the Executive Director of Safety. And then the next question was,
before you move on, Alfredo, does that answer your question?
Yes, and I think also just any potential pushback that you anticipate through that process.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that there will be differences of opinion on how to collectively get to where we all want to be, I think, but certainly open for dialogue, certainly open for input from this body, as well as the Office of the Independent Monitor. Certainly can allow for community input if there's community desire to what should be included or enhanced or upgraded, updated in the matrix. Certainly open to all of that feedback.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So the next,
just before you move on, I guess I would encourage you to engage the broader public in this work. The COB certainly, is supposed to be a representative body, and there may be members of the community who have a particular interest in this topic, who have had harm, who have a lot of experience engaging with the discipline process.
Sure.
And so I think, because the public is often at the heart of why discipline is imposed, I'd suggest that there's a broad reach on engagement here, and meaningful engagement, right? Not just sort of like tacit, take a look, but if you're going to engage folks, have it be real.
Sure. Okay. So the next question is the review focused on the specific matrix penalty table itself, or are you including other related aspects of the discipline handbook? And I think our primary focus is on the penalty table and on progressive discipline, and again trying to fold in a relatively new concept, and that being training-based discipline. So the next question is, if we or other members of the community have specific recommendations or specific items we'd like to be considered? Is there a deadline for those recommendations to be submitted? And I would say no, there is no deadline. Always open to feedback, always open to suggestion, always open to looking at ways we can improve the matrix, make it more clear, make it more responsive. And so even if we complete our update of the matrix beginning of the third quarter of this year, that doesn't mean that we won't get some input from this body or from the community or for the Office of the Independent Monitor that sort of brings us back to the table for additional modifications. So the third grouping of questions really has a lot to do with our engagement on Auraria campus last Friday. And so the first question is, were there any injuries to report? The answer to that is no. No injuries to report on the part of community members, no injuries to report on the part of officers. There were some assaults that officers suffered, but no injuries. There was no use of force that was applied. There was no use of force reports that were completed as a result of that engagement. Did the DPD, DSD, or campus security use any less lethal munitions such as OC spray or pepper balls? No. Again, there was no application of force at all. Really, it was just, hand control, and ultimately, zip ties or handcuffs was the only level of control that was exerted. Why were some DPD officers wearing military-style green uniforms? That is actually the standard uniform of our SWAT team. In fact, many metro area SWAT teams are outfitted in green. There's been a national study that's been done and repeated that identifies green as the safest color for urban area SWAT teams. And so it's been a number of years, probably over 10 years, that they have been outfitted in green for their normal day-to-day activities. And so the reason why we employed the SWAT team and some other teams is because they are uncommitted resources. So when we have a demonstration that's planned, whether it's on the steps of the Capitol or at DU, we try our best to manage that with uncommitted resources, and that typically tends to be our SWAT team, our special operations response team, and our district sort of impact teams. These are teams that aren't, of officers that are assigned to a police district but don't have individual like call response. And so there's that we were able to do that. We're able to use those officers without having to impact calls for service. And so that's why those teams were used, and that one particular team just happens to wear that particular uniform every day.
Before you move on, I see David has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Julia. Chief, you had mentioned that you said that there was no use of force, and you said that there was no use of force through anybody filing complaints. Is that how you determine whether use of force was utilized? Because I know that there is a few videos going around in the internet showing some officers, shoving protesters, and so I'm just trying to hear from that.
Okay. Well, so I would say that there was no use of force to control or arrest someone. Now, if someone got in an officer's space where they felt as though they were endangered, in fact, I know that when I was there with the mayor, there were folks that were getting closer than was comfortable for the mayor, and so there were efforts to push people back and create that safe distance. But in terms of using striking tools, using less lethal, there was none of that. No punching, kicking, any of that.
And Alfredo, go ahead. You can ask your question.
Thank you, Julia. I'm wondering, Chief, around what kind of training is received around how to deal with peaceful protesters?
Yeah.
and how to straddle that line between free speech, the right to
Yep.
protest.
Yep.
So if you could share more about the training that
Yeah. So
this
great question.
unit.
Great question. So, that training begins in the academy, continues, on a quarterly basis after graduation from the academy. So there's quarterly training that making sure people are very clear on our crowd control manual, rules of engagement as it relates to crowd control. Um, uh, um, when we have briefings, when there is a demonstration plan, which is actually quite frequent, just about every weekend and sometimes often during the week, there's an extensive briefing with all of the officers that are involved, where again we go over the crowd control manual, the rules of engagement, make sure that we read all of the applicable laws, making sure that certain weapons that we've agreed in our manual that we will not use, kinetic devices and tear gas and those kinds of things. So that is gone over on a regular basis as we do briefings. Just prior to being deployed to one of these engagements. And then as often as we can, we even do multi-jurisdictional training. So training with the Sheriff's Department, training with the State Patrol, training with Arapahoe County and some of these other jurisdictions that are close. And we have standing MOUs with for mutual aid. And so I think there's a extensive level of training where everybody understands not only rules of engagement in the moment, but the difference between a peaceful protest where people are just engaging in their First Amendment rights and something that becomes an unlawful assembly.
Yeah, that's really helpful to understand. I'm wondering if I could ask a follow-up related to, I guess, moment of reflection, Chief, and what was learned from the protests related to the murder of George Floyd, and how did that find its way through to this conversation around training?
Well, so I mean, obviously the lessons learned from that, I think informed our changes to our crowd control manual, changed the types of less lethal options that we deploy, and helped us understand that we need to make sure that not just on a quarterly basis, but even leading up to an anticipated engagement, that we make sure that everybody has a clear understanding of the law, the First Amendment, the difference between a peaceful protest and an unlawful assembly. And so I think that what happened during George Floyd has actually been very informative to us, which is why we have had hundreds of demonstrations since George Floyd, and the overwhelming majority of them have been peaceful, have not resulted in an arrest, have not resulted in any use of force, and really just is us providing a safe environment, making sure that we keep traffic away so that folks can walk in the street or travel the way that they're inclined to travel as part of their First Amendment expression.
Thank you, Chief.
Sure.
David, go ahead. Oh, and Karen, do you have a question?
I do.
Okay, why don't you go after David, if that's all right?
Okay.
Chief, can you, I know you touched on it a little bit, but can you help us understand the policy or the policies that the officers were following throughout your guys' actions at Auraria?
Excuse me. I'm not sure. Can you just restate your question?
So you mentioned that you guys were you briefed your officers before you guys went to Auraria. Can you help us understand like what type of policy or policies those officers are following during their interactions with the
Yeah.
protesters?
So I mean, they are following. They will always follow, regardless of whether we are supporting Auraria campus, whether we're supporting another state patrol. Our officers are beholden to our policies and procedures, as is all of our mutual aid partners. And so it's made very clear to all of our mutual aid partners what our rules of engagement are, what our policies are, and what we are not willing to do and not willing to allow others to do.
Go ahead, Karen.
Chief, how many hours per quarter of training is occurring around crowd control with your rank and file?
I would say probably 8 hours a quarter, 8 to 10 hours a quarter.
Just to follow up on that, and Karen, if you have additional follow-ups, I'll turn it back to you. But obviously coming out of the George Floyd protests, there was a report from the Office of the Independent Monitor suggesting and recommending that the department go through extensive training. I think you've said it in previous meetings, but I just want it to be said again. Have you completed all of the recommendations related to that report, and do you believe that you're in compliance with that?
Yes, we believe that we are in full compliance with that. And then, I think going back to the training, so, that's 8 to 10 hours of, kind of independent training. And that doesn't include like the on the job training, like, we are, everybody receives this training. But, the elements that we typically secure in order to conduct these engagements are usually the same people, so they're doing it over and over and over again. And so we're still training them. We're still training other officers that may find themselves in that position. But those officers that that are typically used for this are actually practicing it sometimes several times a week.
Just a follow up on that. So it's interesting that you were using SWAT related resources, and that seems like something I hadn't heard your team deploy before. So is that unique to the sort of staffing circumstances, or is that something you've deployed in the past? And then, I assume if you're on the SWAT team, you're receiving a lot of specialized training, but are you also sort of required to do all of the training related to engaging with peaceful protests? And
Yes. So the training is universal, and so they're receiving the same training as the officers in the districts. Again, they have more practice at this because they're doing this every day. And the reason why this is not a new development that we're using the SWAT team. Again, it's intentional that we use resources that are uncommitted, because we don't want to have an impact on call response. And so, we use the entire SWAT team, the entire Special Operations Response team, those other 5-6 officer teams that are assigned to the districts, that don't have a call response responsibility. Those are the elements that we're using to handle each of these situations. It's the same whether it's a demonstration plan for the steps of the Capitol, or if it's a celebration parade after an Avalanche or Nuggets win. So it's really kind of taking advantage of the fact that we have these uncommitted resources to be able to plug in where they're needed.
Before you move on, Debbie, did I cut you off in turning it over to Karen, or were you good with your questions?
No, it was good that you cut me off, but I just wanted to offer like the chief to an opportunity to be a little bit more transparent about those policies. I understand that you guys do follow policy and try to follow policy as much, but being a little bit more transparent as to what those policies are, so folks can kind of understand and anticipate how you guys are going to move when there is a public demonstration like that.
Yeah. So I mean, when there's a public demonstration, I think that it's important to respond and try to identify what is happening and be at least in a position to respond should it turn into some sort of illegal situation. If it doesn't, if it remains a peaceful demonstration, all we will do is just monitor the situation and try to there's always dialogue between organizers of these demonstrations. There's always somebody who either formally or informally has leadership, and so there's dialogue between us and them, trying to understand, what are they trying to do? Are they trying to just gather on the steps? Are they trying to march down the 16th Street Mall? Are they trying to march up East Colfax? And the only reason why we're trying to identify that is so that we can pre-plan how we protect that environment. So if they're gonna, so we'll need to make sure that we put our traffic elements in place so that they can divert traffic, so that they can, have, all of Colfax to walk up and down without having to worry about traffic. And as I think happens, almost every time, they continue with their First Amendment expression, and then they disperse, and then we scale down our resources, and everybody kind of returns to service. And the only time that we would engage a group is if they begin to engage in some sort of illegal conduct. And thankfully, it very rarely happens that there's a large number of people that engage in illegal conduct. There may be one or two people that will break a window or assault someone, and we do our best to try to isolate that person, and we don't just go charging in and make an arrest. We're very strategic about waiting until maybe that person is separated from the group so that we can arrest them without a larger engagement.
Thank you, Chief. And just to follow up that, I know you talked a little bit about the presence and trying to make sure that you maintain a peaceful demonstration. Are you worried at all that deploying folks while they are uncommitted because they look so militarized, are you afraid that that's going to antagonize the peaceful demonstrators that looked like it did so this last Friday?
Yes, and that's why we very rarely show ourselves until it's absolutely necessary. And so, that's one of the things that we learned during George Floyd. We would often keep our resources around corners, in areas where they couldn't be seen, so that they didn't seem antagonistic. And so that was a lesson learned.
Thank you.
Yes.
Alfredo, I see your hands up.
Karen, were you able to have your question asked? I can wait.
I had a follow-ups.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. The follow-up question I had was, I know that there was discussion of revising the memorandum of understanding with outlying law enforcement. Mm-hmm. Did those revisions occur, and what were they? And then second of all, in this latest instance of crowd control, were there outlying law enforcement resources called upon to assist?
So I guess the first part of the question is yes. So we did revise all of our MOUs, and the revisions basically included those parts of our discipline matrix that have been changed. Our rules for engagement, the tools that we were not going to use, the the strategies that we were not going to use. So that's, that was made clear to all of these jurisdictions, and those who chose to sign the MOU are those that we will work with, and those who didn't sign the MOU are jurisdictions that we will not work with. In this particular instance, we did have an MOU in place that spelled out those very things with Auraria Campus. Auraria Campus is somebody that we've worked closely with for years, because their campus is in the middle of our city. And they were made aware. They had been aware, and are again made aware in our briefings of what the MOU was, and what the rules of engagement were going forward. The other team or set of resources that we used were State Patrol. One, that's state property, and two, they're good partners of ours. They've been partners of ours in many of these demonstration situations, and so they too have agreed to all of the terms of our MOU.
And so was that the outside enforcement, was the State Patrol?
State Patrol and Auraria. And as we have contemplated building out a plan in the event that this demonstration does turn violent like it has in some other cities, we've also solicited the assistance of Arapahoe County. Arapahoe County has been a partner of ours in a number of our events, and again, same MOU where they have agreed to follow all of our rules.
Okay.
Go ahead, Alfredo.
Chief, so anticipating that, the protests aren't gonna just fizzle out, and seeing the counter protests and the counter reactions that we're seeing in other cities, what is the department doing, if anything, to, I guess, monitor any counter protests or any threats to keep those students and those peaceful protesters safe?
Yeah. So great question. So there actually have been counter protests already. I believe there's another counter protest scheduled for today. So we have great intelligence, and whether it's through social media or other sources. So we have a pretty good idea of what's happening and what's about to happen. And so much of those plans just include providing information to to the schools, and then certainly identifying resources. There's been lines of sort of demarcation. Right now our intelligence suggests that one group is going to remain far away from the other group, but we are going to plan to kind of create a sort of a division, sort of a barrier between the two groups, so that they can't have a clash. But again, really just monitoring both of the demonstrations as they co-occur, and from afar as best we can, to make sure that we're not escalating, but certainly prepared to respond should there be some sort of a flash and a clash like has been seen in other cities.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Are you seeing a rise in hate crimes in the city, particularly anti-Semitic hate crimes? And what can you say about that?
What I can say about that is that's something that we have we continue to monitor, and I would say the answer is yes. Since October 7th, we have seen a rise in hate crimes across the city. We are in very close contact with all of our Jewish institutions. We're providing extra patrols, making sure that we connect with them on a regular basis to make sure that that they feel safe and supported. And so yes, and I think this is something that we typically see whenever unfortunately, former President Trump says something that's triggering, or some other event that occurs somewhere else in the world, we often see the results of that being an increase in hate crimes. So next, videos show DSD deputies working alongside DPD officers and campus police in the middle of the crowd as arrests are being made. How many DSD deputies were present, and to what extent were they involved in the operation? So roughly 25 deputies were present. Most of those were, I think all of those were either their emergency response unit, again, another sort of uncommitted resource, used to dealing with protest situations, beginning with George Floyd. And so I think a team that we can rely upon to know how to respond in these types of situations. Also, we knew that because these individuals that were to be arrested were going to be processed through the city jail, we knew that we would have to provide transport and security, and so all of those deputies were for that purpose.
Can you just speak to, did you all show up at the same time together? And was that sort of pre-planned, or once you saw the sort of scope of arrests that might be necessary, then they get called in, or sort of,
Yeah.
can you speak more about the order there?
Yeah. So we all sort of arrived at the same place, and I think our approach sort of, I don't want to use the term escalated, but I can't think of a better one at this point in time. So we had, I think Auraria, because it's their campus, enforcing their rules, made the first approach to the group, and they were the ones that actually made 40 of the 45 hands-on arrests for trespassing, and so they were the first to advance, and then supported by Denver Police Resources. And as the crowd began to respond, sort of encircling the tents and kind of trying to create a protective barrier for these tents, I think that's what called for the additional advancement of officers. And then obviously just trying to provide some area protection as we sort of manage these initially 40, and then folks that were being detained to be processed for arrest. And then that's why we had officers that were responsive to people that were assaulting officers, throwing objects at officers. So there were 5 arrests that were related to that kind of behavior.
And then just, obviously we've had a lot of conversations here about the DSD's desire to sort of expand law enforcement authority. Can you sort of speak to what their specific authority is in this case? And then that's one question. Yeah. The second question being, do you all do joint exercises related to responding to protests to ensure that everybody's doing, what they're...
Yes, so we do. And that's why that emergency response team that the sheriff's department has, they have a function inside the jail, but they also have sort of a relatable skill outside of the jail, and so that's why they have been used in demonstration crowd control situations. The other deputies really, their primary skill is just transport and processing, and so that was really all they were used for. And yes, we do jointly train with the sheriff's ERU unit, and also with the sheriff's processing unit, because we have our own mass processing unit, and so there is some joint training there. And then, so I guess the related question is, why did you feel it necessary to utilize DSD deputies for this operation? Again, we were hopeful that we wouldn't have to make a lot of arrests, but wanted to be prepared for the possibility of making a lot of arrests, and so that's why they were involved from the very beginning with the planning and execution of the operation. What steps are being taken to ensure that the DPD does not violate students' constitutionally protected rights to protest and for free speech? Again, I think we're all very clear on the First Amendment, and we're only enforcing identified law violations. Again, part of our quarterly training, part of our regular briefings when as we plan for these events. I mean, it's written even in our operations plan to be read by the person who is leading the briefing meeting, and so nobody walks away not being clear about the First Amendment and what the difference is between an unlawful assembly and protected speech. Next question is, who authorized this operation? And I mean, ultimately, I did. My team was contacted by the chief from the Auraria campus, I believe, on last Thursday, because that's when sort of the protest began. There was dialogue between my team and his team and all of the AHEC school leadership pretty regularly from Thursday into Friday. And it wasn't until Friday that they determined that because of violations of their campus policy, that they wanted to declare that those individuals, if they didn't stop, would be trespassing and thus subject to arrest. So we put together a plan to go address that situation, and I approved the plan. Yeah, my thought in mind was that it would result in a small number of arrests, if any. Ultimately, that didn't turn out to be the case, and I will just share with you that at the conclusion of that operation, because the objective was to remove the tents, which were in violation of the campus policy, and that's why they had declared that they were trespassing. At the when the tents were taken down, and it was part of the plan that just wasn't appropriately executed for Auraria campus to take possession of those tents so that the students who owned them could recover them. But they, for whatever reason, chose to just leave them laying along the side. And as you might imagine, they just came and re-erected the tents, and we were back at square one. At which point in time, they asked us to come back and engage in the operation again. And that's when I shut it down and said, I'm not doing that again. I'm not going to go in and arrest 40, now 80, because by this time the crowd had grown significantly larger, and I didn't think it was safe. Nor did I think it was appropriate to go in and do that again. So I shut it down then. There have since been a number of negotiations with the group to remove the tents. We've been involved in those negotiations, and I've been explaining to the leadership at AHEC that we absolutely aren't going to just go in and sweep out this peaceful protest just because they're occupying a space on your campus that you'd like to use for something else right now, and because of your fears that maybe this could grow to the point where it interferes with other campus activities. I've made that pretty clear, and so we continue to monitor. We continue to talk to assets that are aware of exactly what's going on inside, so that we can identify potential escalation. And so that's kind of the posture that we're in now.
If I could just help unpack some of that, I think, Chief, thank you for making that decision to shut it down again, because I would agree with you that going back and doing the same operation after AHEC wasn't able to keep their side of the street clean is not appropriate. But I'm wondering now, what's next?
Yeah.
Is it something that AHEC then is going to go and bring in a private security group to try to clear out, or at what point do you re-engage, and
Yeah.
what are the
Well,
options for AHEC?
yeah. Well, I mean, they don't have the ability to bring in some private security group in order to do something that we're not willing to do. They don't have that ability. And they don't have the resources themselves to deal with the problem. I think they're such a small police department that they can't do anything without the assistance of State Patrol and the Denver Police Department. And so they are really, I think, at our behest, whether they like it or not. And so nothing's going to happen on that campus unless I and the mayor think that it's the right thing to do on that campus. And I think the mayor and I, again, very much aligned in terms of what is illegal behavior and what is an appropriate response by the Denver Police Department. So I think that's the posture that we're at, and I think that for the most part, AHEC leadership understands that and is okay with that.
Thank you, Chief.
Sure.
Just clarifying that last point that you made. So the reason that State Patrol was involved is because that's state property, because it's a institute of higher education for the state. And so is that not a Department of Public Safety, State Patrol decision, or kind of clarify where that jurisdiction is?
Yeah, I mean, they do have, well, so I guess the most important distinction is that while State Patrol, that is state land, and they can certainly patrol there. They don't have the delegated authority by the safety director of Denver to make arrests. And so that's kind of I think the most important distinction is that they can certainly help us. And they can certainly, be, kind of a force multiplier, but they don't have arrest authority on that campus. So what are the protesters who were arrested being charged with, and have their charges been dropped or dismissed? And as I said before, about 40 of those individuals were arrested specifically for trespass, and that is because they were advised the fact that you have your tent on this property is in violation of campus policy. If you refuse to follow campus policy, they are they have deemed that you are trespassing. And so that announcement was made probably repeatedly over the course of an hour before we ever took any enforcement action. And then as we were engaged in the operation, as we were supporting Auraria Campus Police making those initial 40 arrests and the transport of those arrests to the transport vehicle, there were some individuals who ran up and assaulted officers or threw a water bottle or some other object at an officer. And so there were 5 arrests for that behavior. And at this point, my understanding is all of those individuals have bonded out of jail, and the charges are still in place at this point in time, and it's not my decision whether those charges continue.
David, you got a question?
And then, Chief, I had a question. First off, I wanted to echo what Alfredo said about appreciating the judgment that you made about not continuing the sweeps again the second time. But I did notice that there was an organizer who was arrested, who was separated from the rest of the folks. Can you talk a little bit about why she was separated?
Well, if there was an organizer who, and I do believe that there was an organizer who was arrested. I don't know specifically who she was, and what the circumstances around her arrest were, but she was either arrested because she was identified as someone who was trespassing, or she was identified as someone who had engaged in assaultive behavior.
Yeah, no, I understand why she was arrested, but I also understood that she was separated from the rest of the groups that were under arrest too. So I'm just
Well, I think I don't know, because I don't know that I don't know that that happened, and if it did, I mean, I would have to probably defer to the sheriff's deputies who may have I don't know. I know that there was an effort to take people that were under arrest away from the crowd, because the crowd was trying to sort of unarrest people. They were trying to cut their flex ties off and trying to wrestle them from the control of officers. And so I think there were certainly attempts to move people away from the group of people. But if there was an effort to take one person who was under arrest away from all of the other people who were under arrest, I'm not sure that was done. And if that was done, I don't know why.
thanks.
Sure. And then the last question is, what portion of the arrests were students versus other people? That's unknown. So we did positively identify all 45 of those individuals. We provided those names to the AHEC leadership, because they wanted to know who the students were that had been placed under arrest. So that information has been made available. I haven't been advised how many of those arrests were students versus folks that weren't students. I can tell you that as time goes on and the crowd grows, I would imagine that there are other folks joining that are not students of that school. So I would imagine that if the ratio that day of students to non-students was 1-to-1, is probably 3 or 4-to-1 at this point, because we know that there are a lot of out-of-state plates that are showing up. We through social media we're able to identify that they are recruiting people from other parts of the state, and so we're sure that there are more people in that crowd that are not students than folks that are. And to us, I mean, it doesn't really make any difference. I mean, you're still exercising your First Amendment right, whether you're a student on campus or whether you're not. And I think for all intents and purposes, that's sort of a public space. That quad is where they're all gathered. And so even though the campus does use that area, they do rent that space out and have people have approved permits in order to occupy that space for certain events, or whether it be job fairs or other cultural or school related events. Those have all been canceled because of what's going on over there right now. But at the end of the day, while they would, I think the school would prefer that the group leave the area. I just don't think that there is any legal way to do that. Well, I know that there's no legal way to do that unless they truly do something that creates an unlawful assembly. And there's no intelligence at this point to suggest that that's imminent.
Go ahead, Alfredo.
Just a question around, Chief. Like, who's paying for all of this? Where's the money coming for this?
For
The sweeps and whatever engagement there'll have to be with AHEC.
Well, I mean, I think that I mean, obviously, all of the Denver police officers that may have been on overtime, obviously that's a city expense. The state patrol resources that were utilized that may have been on overtime, that's a state expense. And then, the Auraria campus police, that's been their expense. And so I think right now it's kind of a shared expense.
Mm.
And I guess I would say that we're very clear about our the extent of our legal authority, and we're certainly cognizant of the fact that we certainly don't want to engage in anything that we could be subsequently sued for, and then that costs the taxpayers of Denver.
Mm. Thank you.
Okay, other board questions for the chief? I think, Chief, we've reached the end of our advanced questions. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
This is a question that I had but didn't include because I kind of forgotten about it, but related to my ride along, Chief, in District 4, in talking to different officers about the need for a shot spotter in Police District 4, and that something maybe was already in the works. But that was something that I was really struck by, just the number of guns and random people shooting off guns at 4 in the morning.
Yes.
And how helpful having that shot spotter out here in District 4 would be.
So
update on that.
Yeah. So I mean, there's been an array of shot spotter in District 4 for many, many years. And I think there are 7 specific zones of shot spotter networks throughout the city. Lower downtown, far northeast, East Colfax, Northwest Denver, and then Southwest Denver, and then kind of the kind of the space between along Federal, between North and Southwest Denver. So quite a bit of shot spotter coverage now, all informed by data. So all informed by where we know that there are gun crimes occurring in the city, and I think that there are other neighborhoods who are asking for a shot spotter, and it's very expensive technology, and so it has to be a data informed decision. And right now, we believe that where it is where it needs to be, and where it's not, it probably clearly doesn't need to be. And I think maybe there are some neighborhoods where it's approaching the magnitude of gun violence that it would be wise to put a technology like that there. But again, something that we continue to review.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's yeah, my ride along was very eye-opening in a lot of ways. And I'm really glad that I was able to do that. And
good.
Surprisingly, I want to do more. So
good. Well, good.
Just a follow-up question, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to have a whole collaboration on shot spotters, but I think the city of Chicago is removing all their shot spotters, and I think some of the science on whether those are effective is pretty mixed. So I'm wondering if you could say more about your thoughts on that.
I can. So yes, the new mayor of Chicago did decide to not renew the contract of with ShotSpotter. I think right now he's in a pretty significant fight with a lot of aldermen, which I guess in my mind is similar to city council folks in Denver. But there are a number of aldermen in Chicago that believe that ShotSpotter is essential to the safety of their communities, and they don't want it removed. And so I think they're still kind of in a wrestling match over whether or not to keep it or remove it. And I would venture to say that we're maybe in a similar posture. I know that there are folks within the city who don't think it's a valuable technology and that it really only leads to over policing. I would argue against that, but I think it's a fair argument. I do, like I said, I know that there are neighborhoods that ask for it every time I meet with them. And then there's the other side who thinks that it just seems to find its way into Black and brown communities. Again, a fair statement, but I think unfortunately, the data shows that where significant violent crime is occurring happen to be in Black and brown communities. And I think that that while ShotSpotter is a tool that we should continue to rely on, and it does have the ability to save lives and allow us to recover evidence that's necessary in other crimes or other incidents. I think that it's not a panacea, and we certainly need to continue to do what we have been doing, what was successful in 2023, what I think continues to be successful in 2024, which is recognizing that there's value in using other city resources and other community partners to deal with the challenges that communities have. And so, we've seen a great deal of success, for instance, at Alameda and Federal, where violence in that neighborhood has, nosedived, and the data will also show that that was done while having a reduction in police contacts, a reduction in arrests. And so that's kind of what I would like to see is some of these persistently violent locations like Upper East Colfax or Pago Sanchez Park. I would like to see the partnership with this sort of whole of government approach, using community partners to address some of the dynamics that relate to violent crime, so that it's not a enforcement centric strategy.
Thank you. Other board member questions? Okay, opportunities in the future to engage, so we can bring those forward. Thank you, Chief Thomas, for talking with us today. I'll give you, well, I'm not giving you any time back because we're over time, but
Yeah.
I will take 10 extra minutes and send you on your way. So
All right.
thank you so much
Yes.
for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Monitor Castle, do you have anything? Go ahead, Alfredo.
I was just
Okay.
thanking him.
Monitor Castle, you've got anything to talk about in the public forum?
No, thank you.
Okay. Do you have any? Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
I have a couple of more administrative things for the board.
Thank you.
Like for the board in open session. There's like a jet flying by my house. I don't know what's going on. We don't normally get jets around here. Couple of announcements to make. The first is that the board still has a vacancy. The city councils, 2 vacancies. City councils has closed their applications and are evaluating candidates. The mayor's office has still, accepting applications until the position is filled. So, encouraging any attendees to take a look at that. Scheduling update. Director Saldate, as you all know, we had to reschedule last month our meeting with him. We've successfully rescheduled that to June 21. And we are looking at, he was also scheduled to meet us in July, so I'm looking at possibly pushing the July one out, so we're not meeting back to back with him there. And then also, there's some community, the mayor is hosting with city council some community meetings in the coming weeks. I think the first one was I think it was the first one was yesterday in District 3. But there are efforts going on actively currently to engage on that. I think a lot of conversations about, do you feel safe what's working, what's not working, sort of the approach there. But you want to make folks aware of that. And then we also had a couple of other quick hits here. Our June 7th meeting currently does not have any scheduled guests. I wanted to ping the board about whether or not we wanted to invite somebody for that. So that's in a month. Try to get, 3 to 4 weeks if possible of lead time to get this on people's calendars. So if there's anyone that you all have been hoping to meet with or have questions for that isn't on our regular rotation, I wanted to throw that out there.
I have a question regarding that, Daniel.
Sure.
Are we only able to invite guests within the public safety, I guess, bodies, or can we invite the leadership at AHEC, for example, to come and talk to us about the student protests and what they're doing and what they're thinking?
We can invite anybody we would like.
Will they show up? Is this different?
Right.
That is their decision. They the public safety leadership is required to meet with us on a quarterly basis. And so those are sort of set and we schedule them, far in advance.
It's very rare for somebody to say no. And even if they say no at first, typically they'll show up later. So if there are folks that we want to engage, happy to do that. Just know that our authority, doesn't extend to those individuals. And so how we engage with them might differ as well.
Gotcha.
What else, Daniel?
Couple of sort of forward-looking things. One is that this summer, July, we're going to have board leadership elections. That happens every summer, but it's easy to forget about it. So if just wanted to make sure that board members are aware. With our vice chair leaving, there will be a vacancy. Assuming Julia decides to stay in leadership, but there will definitely be at least one vacancy to fill, and so I wanted to make sure board members were aware of that. Happy to have further conversations about what that might look like or what all that entails separately. And
what I'll say too is happy to pass the torch to anybody who would like it. And certainly from a vice chair standpoint, if you don't feel like you want the chair, but you would be interested in the vice chair, please nominate yourself. And I think, this year has been a good demonstration of sort of why that role is so important and how we leverage it for balance in the case that I have a conflict. And at some point I need to stop being the chair of the board. So other folks, do some deep digging in your souls about your desires there. And happy to meet with you if you'd like to talk about what that looks like in terms of time commitment.
And then there's also yesterday evening, Karen, I think you were on the call. Together Colorado did a presentation of their involvement on the Before the Badge, Beyond the Blue program. That's sort of a pre-academy community orientation for police recruits. And she invited folks who were interested to join and observe or participate in the next one. It's going to be July. It's a 2-week program. You don't have to be there the whole 2 weeks. Take all your vacation time for that. But it runs from July 8 to 19. So if you would like to attend the first day or attend part of that, please let me know and we can set that up. That's July 8 to 19, I believe. So I wanted to let you guys know about that. And then just another reminder for the board about if we want to start another strategic planning, do another round of strategic planning this fall. It is helpful to get that started, get the ball rolling on that earlier rather than later. If we want to, get it on our calendars, get it on the consultants' calendars, get it, do all the prep work for that. It's not, immediately urgent, but depending on when we want to do, if we want to do that in September, it's coming up sooner than we think, versus November. So wanted to make sure that's on all y'all's radar as well. And that's all I got.
Very much. Are we able to get Tymisha onto?
I don't think so.
Okay, we will just approve the minutes in the next meeting. Do any board members have additional business they'd like to cover in this meeting? Okay. Monitor Castle, do you have any ongoing investigations or matters of deliberative privilege that you'd like to cover in an executive session?
Yes, please.
Okay. May I have a motion to move to executive session?
So moved.
Actually, I don't know how we do a motion without a quorum.
I think it's, of course, 2/3 of those present.
Those present. Okay, great. May I have a motion to move to executive session?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Great. All in favor, aye.
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 All right, any opposed? Okay, great. The motion passes. See you in executive session, and this concludes the meeting today. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.